beginning of May, while the diplomats and politicians searched for a peaceful solution to the Falklands crisis, ships from the huge task force the government had sent to the South Atlantic were on station, policing the 200-mile exclusion zone around the islands. Any Argentine ship or plane entering the area was deemed a legitimate target. So far, most of the military activity had been confined to aerial attacks and naval bombardments on Argentine positions round the Port Stanley airstrip. But on the night of May the 2nd, an action took place that fundamentally changed the course of the conflict, put it on quite a different level. The British nuclear-powered submarine Conqueror normally patrols the waters of the North Atlantic on routine NATO business. The nearest she gets to action stations is on the various exercises against other friendly ships pretending to be the enemy.
And the ship right ahead on that bearing. 355-ish. Right ahead, 355. Nothing more, CP. Ask the sonar to identify each target if they can, Mark.
Conqueror is a hunter-killer submarine armed with the latest Tigerfish torpedoes. Since the start of the Falklands crisis, she'd been in the South Atlantic shadowing the movement of the Argentine fleet. In her sights now was Argentina's second-largest ship, the cruiser General Belgrano. The ship was 59 miles outside the exclusion zone. One of Conqueror's torpedoes hit her amidships, and in less than an hour, she'd sunk. As the 1,000-strong crew took to the lifeboats, the two escorting destroyers fled. 382 men were lost. In Buenos Aires, reaction to the sinking of the Belgrano was stunned disbelief, and a final realization that Britain really did mean business. To placate international concern, the Foreign Secretary, Mr. Pym, explained why he judged the action necessary.
Yesterday, there was a very real threat to that zone posed by a cruiser. There was also an attack on a helicopter from two ships, which were immediately counterattacked by British forces. I want to make it clear that the British are not undertaking these military engagements by choice. We are there to defend British soil and British people. And we wish to go back to the negotiating table at which we were sitting very properly with Argentina before all this began.
At the negotiating table, Mr. Pym told the UN Secretary-General, Senor Perez de Cuellar, that Britain wouldn't compromise until Argentina withdrew her forces. Far from doing that, though, her Air Force was preparing a devastating blow. On the 9 o'clock news on May the 4th, the reality of the war was brought into millions of homes by defense spokesman Ian MacDonald.
In the course of its duties within the total exclusion zone around the Falkland Islands, HMS Sheffield, a Type 42 destroyer, was attacked and hit late this afternoon by an Argentine missile. It is feared that there have been a number of casualties, but we have no details of them yet.
On Hermes, there was alarm and confusion. The attacking aircraft had been totally undetected until it struck. The ship swung away from the attack, and there was the crash of chaff charges being fired, throwing radar deflectors into the air to confuse incoming missiles. Submarines and torpedoes were reported, but the helicopters couldn't find them. On the horizon, we could see smoke rising from one of the destroyers. It had been hit, but how badly? The answer was brought by one of Sheffield's officers. His ship was aflame and disabled. All power, all communication, all ability to fight the flames had been lost. They needed firefighting assistance urgently. Casualties were heavy.
We recovered our four captains that had been airborne throughout this battle. Sheffield is being supplied with AFFF, fuel suits, gas turbine, river pump, and breathing apparatus to fight her fires on board. And as you probably know, we have some of her casualties on board.
The helicopters began the shuttle. Equipment to Sheffield, the injured back to Hermes. The men hadn't had time to put on protective clothing. The attack had been too swift. Twenty men had died, all within minutes of the Exocet striking and filling the ship with pungent smoke. Another score were brought to the flagship for treatment. They all survived. The aircraft lift, which brings the Harriers to the flight deck, is also used for casualties. It's the fastest way to get injured men down 2 decks to the sick bay. The rest of the crew of Sheffield stayed on board, helping with the firefighting. But Sheffield's own water mains were out of action, and the ships alongside could do nothing but cool the outside of the hull. After 5 hours with parts of the deck white hot, the order was given to abandon ship. The survivors were distributed around the fleet. The calm seas saved many lives, allowing them all to be taken off. The same calm seas that had made it possible for the Argentine Étendard to slip in beneath the radar horizon. On the same day, we lost a Sea Harrier. It never came back from a bombing mission. After these reverses, it was time to start taking in some of the lessons.
There has been a major revision of the way we think in terms of closing up to action stations as a result of Sheffield. And I'll just say again, if we detect enemy contact within 50 miles closing, or that's air contact, or a surface contact within 25 miles, which is approximately Exocet missile range release, then we will go to this on anti-flash, close all doors, hatches and manholes, quarter stand to. That's the end of that particular message. We're now satisfied that there is no longer a threat to us.
This was a gloomy period, a ship abandoned, men dead. And in a community as close as the Navy, there were few aboard who didn't know somebody from Sheffield.
Has anybody not seen this list for missing people? Have we seen it? Yeah. Okay, well, I think we've got a more or less a good count now of how many people are missing.
It also meant considerable discomfort. Sleeping below the waterline was now forbidden, and many men had to abandon their bunks and spread their mattresses in passageways. As much home as they'd have while the war lasted. There were just 4 serious injuries. The rest had the shock of losing their ship and 20 of their shipmates to contend with. Sheffield's captain, Sam Salt.
I'm sure every captain would say that their ship's company was the best afloat. But I certainly believe that mine was.
Captain,
I'd just like to finish, if I could, and say that the other part of the decision to abandon was the fact that we were taking part, or taking the attention of other ships and units in the area at a time when we were subject to attack. We had no hope of retrieving the fighting capability of that ship. The fire had extended to an extent that was dangerous with regard to our own ammunition magazines and missile magazines. And the ship's company, all of them, were on the upper deck and had been on the upper deck in very cold conditions for 5 hours. We were not winning that fire, beating it. We were losing.
Sheffield continued to float while the fire burnt itself out, shrouded by the sea mists. The Navy wanted a safer, not just for pride, not just for the equipment aboard, but for the lessons they could learn about the vulnerability of ships to a modern missile. All this damage had been done by just one Exocet. One of the officers winched down to the still steaming decks to see what could be saved. Sheffield was taken in tow, but the hull was too close to the waterline. When the sea came up, she sank, taking the bodies of the dead with her.
On the same day that Sheffield was attacked, came the first British battle losses in the air. A Harrier from Hermes was shot down over the Goose Green area of the islands during a bombing raid. The wreckage was shown repeatedly on Argentine television as evidence of the effectiveness of their defense system. Also shown widely on television as evidence of Argentine humanity was the burial of the British pilot, Lieutenant Nicholas Taylor.
Una formación especial de los soldados argentinos.
The service was conducted in Spanish by the military.
Y las palabras del Señor.
No islanders were allowed to be present.
Imploramos tu clemencia para que lo conduzca al paraíso a este hijo tuyo que ya ha concluido su vida mortal. Así no existe ni la muerte, ni la angustia, el sufrimiento, sino la paz y la alegría en cuanto a tu Hijo, el Espíritu Santo, por los siglos de los siglos.
Away from the war zone and the growing list of casualties, there was some opposition at home to the British government's policy on the Falklands. Arguments against what was happening in the South Atlantic ranged from the official Labour Party line that what the government was doing was broadly correct, but that they should put more emphasis on seeking a peaceful solution through the United Nations, to the view further left that the task force was a mistake and should never have been sent in the first place.
Oh, we're criticising the government. The Navy didn't decide to go to the Falklands. We are standing up for the true interests of our servicemen. Don't let Mrs. Thatcher now shield behind the servicemen and women she has put at risk. They decided. We didn't decide. And what we should do is to speak our minds. That's what democracy is about. You see, truth is the first casualty of war. And if we are silent, then that will be, or if we are silenced by the press, which is what is already happening, then the British people will be denied the knowledge of their own opinion. And that's very important that we should speak out and let everyone understand where we stand.
En el aire, ATC, LS-82.
But at least Britain wasn't subjected to the constant propaganda bombardment television viewers in Argentina had to put up with. This specially made commercial was only one weapon Argentina was using in the propaganda war, a war Britain wasn't winning. These pictures of Argentine prisoners from South Georgia were taken by the Ministry of Defense. The men were on their way home, but still being processed by the British authorities. Compared with the way Argentina had exploited the capture of British Marines on the Falklands, these scenes were poorly shot and sent back too late to have any real effect. The ministry had been warned that Argentina would give the returning prisoners the full television treatment, welcome them home as returning heroes. And that's precisely what happened. There was considerable concern in Whitehall that whatever setback Argentina seemed to have, the authorities were able to turn it to some kind of propaganda advantage. The most dramatic example of this was the return of the survivors from the General Belgrano. It was moving enough on its own account, without the treatment Argentine television was to give it.
Las escenas de emoción.
For these men, the war was over. For the men of the task force, it was just beginning.
The task force had no further worries about the Argentine Navy. After the sinking of the Belgrano, the Argentine fleet stayed in or near port, neutralized by Britain's nuclear submarines.
Roger, just turning at the moment, can you hang on?
The threat remained from the air. The drifting fog banks offered little protection from radar-guided missiles, but made it hazardous for the Harriers. If they took off in this mist, their radars weren't good enough to be sure of finding the carriers again. And the risks of flying turned out to be very real.
The weather has again today been the dominant feature. Large, dense fog banks, solid from the surface up to about 3,000 feet, have been making life particularly dangerous for low-level flying operations. Sadly, we've learned that 2 sea harriers from HMS Invincible were lost during a low-level search about 80 miles west of us this morning. We have no details of the accident, but must presume that both pilots have been lost. No information is available at present on the whereabouts of the Argentinian aircraft carrier or their navy. And I've just heard now that the plan to replenish our escorts this evening has been put in abeyance until further notice. That's all.
While the task force was struggling with the bad weather in the war zone near the Falklands, at Southampton, the largest luxury liner in the world, the QE2, had been requisitioned and turned into a troop ship. On board went 3,000 men from the 5th Infantry Brigade. The 1st Battalion, the Welsh Guards, and the 2nd Battalion, the Scots Guards, were followed by men from the Gurkha Rifles. It was to make the ship a kind of divisional headquarters at sea. Departure scenes at Southampton were now becoming almost a ritual. In the previous few weeks, thousands of men had gone on board a variety of ships. None, of course, as grand as this. But as the military approach to the crisis was strengthened, the diplomatic efforts were weakening. After a frustrating series of talks, Britain's representative at the United Nations, Sir Anthony Parsons, made what amounted to a final announcement.
I also made clear to the Secretary-General, as I had made clear throughout the negotiations, and as I have equally made plain to all members of the Council in informal consultation, that although my government's mind would never be closed to any avenue which promised to bring about a peaceful solution to the present crisis, we could not, in the meantime, allow ourselves to be in any way inhibited from carrying out military action in accordance with our inherent right of self-defense under Article 51 of the United Nations Charter.
In effect, Sir Anthony was saying that the time for talking was over. The fighting would begin forthwith, unless Argentina started to withdraw her troops. There was absolutely no sign of that. The evidence, in fact, pointed quite the other way. The only people leaving the Falklands were the Argentines injured in the bomb attacks. More men and supplies were moving in and out of Port Stanley, despite the runway bombing and the blockade. To judge from these Argentine television pictures, it looked as though British attempts to demoralize the troops on the island by hardship and constant bombardment had failed as well.
But the Argentine troops had yet to tangle with the British ground forces, also in good voice, sailing south in Canberra.
We're gonna
already the first contingents of the SAS were slipping ashore to spy out the land. They discovered a major airbase at Pebble Island and launched an airborne commando raid against it, backed by a thunderous naval bombardment. The land battle had begun.